lawless hate riot that we saw on the streets of Montreal is what happens after 9 years of a woke Prime Minister pushing radical woke identity politics, dividing people by race, gender, vaccine status, religion, and more. On top of dividing, he erases our heroes and history, saying Canada has no core identity. He opened the borders to terrorists and lawbreakers. The results? Assassinations on Canadian soil, firebombings and terrorist attacks against places of worship, 251% more hate crime. It wasn't like this before this Prime Minister and won't be after he's gone. Why not an election so we can fix what he broke?
I personally believe that it is shameful that anyone would speak of the violence that took place on our streets here in Canada in political terms for purely partisan political intention. Mr. Speaker, I believe it is all of our responsibility to stand up to such hatred and to condemn it in the strongest possible terms, unequivocally and on behalf of all decent Canadians.
After finding out that the economy is entering its 6th consecutive quarter of shrinking per capita GDP, that's income per person down, while the American income per person is up. After she learned that there are 2 million people lined up at food banks, 38% more, chronic homelessness, 1,400 homeless encampments in Ontario after 9 years of this government, she says we're not in a recession. We're in a vibe session, she says. So what's her message to people who are hungry and homeless after 9 years of her government? They just need to get with the vibe?
Exactly. My message to the leader of the Conservatives is to be a little more economically literate. I guess he didn't look at the recent GDP revisions, the upward revisions in GDP that show a good result for Canada in per capita GDP. They also show that Canada has not had a recession, contrary to the predictions of many when we saw the COVID recession. We have had a soft landing. That's something to celebrate.
You know what's cruel? The $250 check that's going out in spring, this Liberal government is excluding seniors,
Shameful.
people living with disabilities, and people who just started working. What a slap in the face. Why is this Liberal government excluding the most vulnerable in our country?
Well, the NDP leader is giving Canadians whiplash with his latest flip-flop and the flop on the flip. First, he said he tore up his deal with the Liberal government. Then he said that he had taped it back together because they had signed on to his 2-month tax trick. Now he rises on his feet to say that the trick is a ripoff of seniors and persons with disabilities. So then why won't he put his actions where his words are and vote for a carbon tax election so Canadians can choose between this 2-month trick and axing the tax for good?
I'd like to thank the NDP leader for his question, and I hope he and all members of this House will help work with us to unblock this Parliament and to get the support to Canadians that they need and deserve. When it comes to the working Canadians rebate, we know that there are hardworking people across the country who have been through challenging times, and we know that now is the time to provide them with that extra support. I hope all MPs will join us in doing that.
The streets of a major Canadian city were set on fire this weekend, and the Prime Minister was nowhere to be found. A radical, anti-Semitic, anti-Canadian mob burned cars, smashed windows, assaulted police officers, and the Prime Minister was nowhere to be found. It took him until noon the next day, and he offered the most basic platitudes resembling some standard condemnation that he's been offering after fomenting the hatred that he's now surprised about. So I have one question. When was the Prime Minister told about the riot, and why did he decide to keep dancing the night away?
My colleague, the Minister of Defence, I think properly explained the outrage that all Canadians felt at this wanton, reckless violence on the streets of Montreal. Mr. Speaker, we condemn unequivocally the rising and concerning rates of anti-Semitism and all other hate crimes in the country. We're working with provincial authorities, local police to combat this. And let me be very clear, Mr. Speaker, no matter what group you claim to represent or what cause you're advancing. If you're smashing windows and assaulting Canadians, you're a criminal and you'll face the full consequences of the law.